Rabbi I'll start with a story. But I remember another story, so I'll tell you that story first. And then if I remember, I'll go back to the story I wanted to tell. There was a Yid in Crown Heights. Whose name was Rebbe Dubinsky. When I knew him, he was old, and he had a very hard of hearing. Anybody who grew up in my generation remembers that every Kriyas HaTorah there was a man who stood on the bimah next to the Balkeda because he wanted to hear the Kriyah. He would get very, very nervous if people around him made noise. He was always trying to adjust his hearing to hear the Kriyah. His name was Moshe Dubinsky. He wasn't always old, he didn't always have hearing aids. There's pictures of him when he looks good and young. But I remember as an old guy who stood on the bimah, he couldn't hear Kriyas HaTorah, Moshe Dubinsky. He came to the Rebbe from Montreal in the early 50s, and he lived here in New York. And he was a very interesting chassid in his way. He had a lot of schusim, an interesting schusim. One of his schusim was the Rebbe used to make a Farbrengen, and the Rebbe would sit at a table that didn't look as good as these tables, you understand. There was no tablecloth. The Rebbe sat at a table, and that was it. And he realized that it's not appropriate. So he went home, he went into his closet, and he took a beautiful linen tablecloth, and he brought the 770, and he put it down on the table, so the Rebbe's Farbrengen had a beautiful tablecloth. Problem was, after Shabbos, that was the end of that tablecloth, so the next Friday he took another one. And his wife discovered that the supply of tablecloths is diminishing, it's ascending to heaven. So she said to him, what's going on with the tablecloths? He says, well, the Rebbe's Farbrengen, you're talking in 1951, the very, very beginning. He just knew it has to look half decent. So his wife said, you could bring it home after Shabbos. You can clean it and use it a second time. It's not like every time you use the tablecloth, you bring a new one. So he had this chus for all the years. He put on the tishtachet, he put on the tablecloth by the Rebbe. He did it when nobody thought of it, and then this was his chus. He made the silk gatlach, handmade silk gatlach. The gatlach that Rebbe wore, him or his wife used to prepare. It's one of his chus. They attribute to him the armchair, the felt armchair to him also. The Rebbe was sitting in a folding chair. You know that there's pictures of the Rebbe sitting in a folding chair. I think his wife made it. Yeah, she made the gatlach, yeah. Do you remember the old folders with the wood slats? The Rebbe had that in his room. There's pictures. The Rebbe sat on a folding chair, and 770 there was no chairs, there were benches. And when you say 770, you really mean they were davening outside in the courtyard over there, where everything was gewaldig verchazet, keminig hanegidem amafasamim, which is begematria Chabad. Don't ask me how, but it was a mess. So he decided that Rebbe needs a normal chair. So he bought a chair. It cost a lot of money for him. It was a lot of money, and he brought the 770, and the Rebbe wouldn't use it. There was a read my folding chair. So I think I heard it was Leima Kunyan. Anisht, it is a Shena Maised, which means it could have happened. The next Friday night, they removed every single chair from 770 except the one chair with the arms. So the Rebbe came in and he asked for the folding chair and said, sorry, he said, they're all gone. So Belas Bereda, the Rebbe sat in that chair, and that's how the Rebbe. He had different schusim, this Moshe Dubinsky. So the story that they tell about him was he went to a carpenter to make the Rebbe a new standard, a lectern, a standard. So he comes to the carpenter and he says, the carpenter, I need to make a standard for a rabbi, a rov. He spoke in Yiddish, Mr. So the stoller, the carpenter says, how big is he? How big is he? He's the biggest Rebbe in the world. Biggest Rebbe in the world. Now, the carpenter had very practical considerations, but the Moshe Dubinsky didn't hear it. Anyway, he came back to pick up the standard. The height of the standard was above the Rebbe's head. So he said, what are you doing? The Rebbe can't use it. He said, you told me he's the biggest Rebbe in the world. Anyway, they had to fix the standard. It didn't exactly work out. That's the story that I remembered. But the story that I wanted to share was in light of the Sikha that we just learned. That after the Yom Kippur War, after the Yom Kippur War, I did tell them that after the Yom Kippur War, the Rebbe was visited by all kinds of members of the Tzahal, of the Israeli army. And some pretty important people came to see the Rebbe, because the Rebbe was so unbelievably helpful to Yisrael, Bechlal, and in those wars. The 6-day war, the Yom Kippur War especially. And they knew it, you know, that when Arik Sharon agreed to cross the Suez in the Yom Kippur War, he said, I'm not doing it unless the Rebbe gives me permission. And that they contact someone in New York who came to 770 in the middle of the night, and he went into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said to do it. Arik Sharon would not do that maneuver behind the Arabs until they got the Rebbe's okay. So a lot of them came to see the Rebbe. There was a lot of Yiras HaKovit. It was a very, they knew from an angle of military how important the Rebbe is. So the story is that one of these men went into the Rebbe. There's a Rebbe Maises. But one of these men went into the Rebbe, and the Yom Kippur War was a very terrible war. And he told the Rebbe that he lost a certain number of men from his group. I think he told the Rebbe that he lost 16. So the Rebbe corrected him, and the Rebbe said 17. Imagine a mafaked, a sergeant or a colonel goes into his rabbi and says, I lost 16 soldiers, and the rabbi tells you lost 17. So how do you correct the Rebbe? How do you correct the Rebbe? What's he supposed to say? He said, Rebbe, I'm the colonel, I lost 16 people. The Rebbe said 17. Anyway, it went back and forth. The Rebbe said 17, he said 16, and that's how it stayed. When he went out of Yechidus, he heard that another one of his soldiers had died. And that the Rebbe was right. When the Rebbe told him 17, he was mishtemem. How could the Rebbe possibly know that? He didn't know. How could the Rebbe possibly know it? So how the second part of the story happened, whether it was another Yechidus or it was a letter, he asked the Rebbe, how could the Rebbe possibly know that? How could the Rebbe know that? He didn't know. How could the Rebbe know? These are his soldiers. And the Rebbe told him, allegedly, the Rebbe told him, every neshama that comes into this world and every neshama that leaves this world passes through this room. Every neshama that comes into this world and every neshama that leaves this world passes through this room. Der Cheder. The Meise is Meshugah. If I stop talking, it'll get noisy, right? So I got to keep on talking. I told the story and I was dispelled myself. Can you imagine? They say it's base of drive and Tshuva and it is a darshan. You tell a darshan and Vanteda right away, I'm putting into my next speech, and he killed it. So I'm a darshan. So it's a Meise Pelle. It's an unbelievable story. It gives you an insight into how little we understand. How little we understand the Rebbe's world. What the Rebbe sees and what the Rebbe hears and what the Rebbe knows. There's another story, it's not nearly on this level, but it's still also on Maidendika Maise, that a boy who came from a Hamish Shtub, not a Lubavitcher house, but from a very Hamish Shtub, and he became closer to Lubavitch. He started learning in 770. And when it came time for his shidduch, so his mashpiyim, his madrichim, someone in the yeshiva set up a shidduch for him. He wrote to the Rebbe, he met this girl a few times, and he's getting engaged to her. He wrote to the Rebbe, Rebbe Baruch, getting engaged. And now he realized he had to tell his parents, he has biological parents also. So he told his parents that he's getting engaged to Plainis Bas Plaini. And his mother said to him, I don't understand, how do you do something like this without consulting with us, with your parents? You know, we're whatever chassidim we are. You're a Lubavitcher chassid. But how do you go ahead and make a decision like this without consulting your parents? And he said, listen, I asked the Rebbe. So the way the story goes is she came to 770 and she walked into the base medrash, she walked up to her son and she gave him a patch. A chutzpah, a boy goes ahead and that's how it's. The truth of the matter is it's a hoze shenkel meir. It's unacceptable. It's a mice, it's a chutzpah shenkel meir. But she made a scene in 770 and I forgot how it unfolded, but he said to his mother, if you don't like the shidduch, go talk to the Rebbe. So she got into the Rebbe. I don't know how quickly she got into the Rebbe, and she says to the Rebbe, I'm a mother. So my son, Nevestach, he left one chassidus with a different chassidus. How does he go ahead and make a shidduch? The last person to find out is his mother. The Rebbe makes the decision if he's getting married, and afterwards tells his mother, the Rebbe gave a bracha and gave Hachnah. So the Rebbe said to her, I want to tell you what I do when someone writes me about a shidduch. When someone writes and tells me about a shidduch, I go l'mayla. and I examine if there's a problem, or any difficulties with this match, any things about this match which spiritually cannot work. And if I determine that Lamaila, the Shidduch, is a match, it could work, I'm asking to the Shidduch. So the Rebbe basically said to her, I checked it out, and according to my judgment, it's a good Shidduch. So the way the story finishes, she walked out of the Rebbe, she went into the Beis HaMedrash, and she went over to her son, and she said, Mazel Tov. She got it.
It's in the book of the Maskir.
Oh, it labels Sefer. Oh, okay. Oftentimes, the question is asked 1,000 times. People, all kinds of people ask, what makes the Lubavitcher Rebbe? There's a lot of Gedolim. The Lubavitcher Rebbe is a lot of Gedolim. What's the difference? What's the difference? The difference is when you have a problem, you go to the oil. You don't go to another place. That's the difference. Why do you go to the oil if you're this kind of chassid, or that kind of chassid, or this kind of litvak, or that kind of litvak? Because it works. That's why people go to the oil, because it works, not because it's a popular spot. But people ask the question. A Rebbe, Rabbi say, a Rebbe is a Yid who's in tune with Neshama. He's in tune with Neshama. And from his in-tuneness with Neshama, he's in tune with every Yid. That's the pshat. That's the pshat. That's what the Rebbe. He's a Neshama person. I'm going to tell Nechama, if you don't mind. I'll tell you another story. There was a Yid who lived in Eretz Yisrael, who's now passed away. His name was Arav Reuven Dunen. He lived in the city of Haifa, which is a blue-collar workers' town. They were Gershon Communisten. They're
Red color.
It's red. They're very.
Communist is red.
Yes. What did I say? Oh no, blue-collar means blue-collar workers. Blue-collars in the industry. Blue-collars means that they work with their hands and their feet. They're not the suit and tie people. Reuven Dunin was a Yid, and his story was that he came from home, very, very from home. His father was a Talmud of Rabbi 11. Rabbi 11 was a Adam Gadol, and he was a Litvak. Rabbi 11 was a very Erlich Yid, and the Rebbe used to send him every year a matzah. This is a Maimer Amusker. The Rebbe used to send Rabbi 11 a matzah every year through a certain shliach. The Rebbe sent matzah, whole matzah to certain individual people. And one year, the person who had to carry the matzahs, the Rebbe gave him with a matzah vedikin. Instead of giving him 3, they gave him 2. He was a bit surprised. By the time he got to Eretz Yisrael before Pesach, or however the matzahs were sent, Rabbi 11 had passed away. The Rebbe used to send him matzah every year. You can sein. Because he was sending for several people. The Rebbe didn't mention. But Rabbi 11, when he passed away, his son came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him to tell him about his father. And when he started talking about his father, the Rebbe stood up. And he stood the whole Meshach Zman. Rabbi 11 is famous. He was the rabbi of all the prisoners. Before Israel was officially a state, so they were terrorists, Yiddish boys, and they put him in jail. And a lot of them were executed. He would go into those prisons, and he was a special Yid. He was a Litvak, but he was a chassid durch and durch and durch. He was a Litvak. He was a Chassidish Litvak. He was a chassid. He was a real Jew. Very hard for us people with the labels to figure this out. He was a Chassidish Yid. He was a Litvak. He put film on like this, and he didn't say v'yatma b'kodim b'kodim b'shichei, but he was a Chassidish Yid. Anyway, so his Rabbi 11, one of his people was Reuven Dunin's father. So he was raised in a very, very frum home. When Israel became a state in 1948, there were a lot of, unfortunately, frum kids. It was mamish, but gemeinte dosidus. You know, the Tzionis is the new Mashiach. A lot of frum boys and girls, Nebuch, in 48, those years went away from Yiddishkeit because this was the new Yiddishkeit. But after a few years, they, as they say, mit Choyzlan and Bitter and Toss. It's nicht Punkt as they. So he went away completely, this Reuven Dunin, and he built Eretz Yisrael. And then after a while, he was sick of it. He had enough of it. So he became a Baal Tshuva. I have a neighbor who learned in the yeshiva in Lud. He's much younger than Reuven Dunin, who told me that the first Rosh Hashanah, when he came back to yeshiva, this Reuven Dunin came back to yeshiva after he had gone away, he sat at the same table with him, Yom Neroi, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And he told me, ich hab keinmal nicht gesehen, a Yid soll weinen als mein ganzes Leben. Means in English, he says, I never saw a man cry like this. He Pasha did tshuva, like you read in the Sfarim, the Yid did tshuva, but the kishke zay nereis, admit zay nefesh. He did tshuva. Anyway, he learned in Lud, the mashpia was of Shem Chaim. The Shem Chaim was a real mashpia. Shem Chaim passed away more than 50 years ago, and a lot of people will say he was the last mashpia. Shem Chaim was a real mashpia. Shem Chaim Kesselman. He was very dedicated. His whole life was the Bachrim, and he was an unbelievably dedicated and successful mashpia in Chassidus and Adarkei Chassidus. He was a real mashpia. Now the Mishpacha printed the biography of Shem Chaim, and in the biography they printed a very interesting letter. They printed a letter where the Rebbe wrote to him. The Rebbe wrote to Shem Chaim that he should not let the Bachrim to come to New York until they're ready. He should keep the Bachrim in Etzisol until they're coming to New York will be a Tayelis. The boys come here if they're not ready to be here. The event is a patet. Reb Shlomo Chaim did that, but he didn't show the Bachrim the letter. So the Bachrim hated him sinas mavis. They considered him nishka makushin. He's not sending the Bachrim to the Rebbe. It's felt in his kashrus. After he passed away, they found there was a direct instruction from the Rebbe. So what would happen if he would tell the Bachrim that the Rebbe told him, so they wouldn't hate him so much? And for the Gemara, it's none of their business. This is that generation. It's fascinating. When you see that letter, the Bachrim Hamazei fight because he didn't let them come until he felt that they were right to be by the Rebbe. Reuven Dunin was a big boy. He was in his late 20s. He was not a Bachar. He was much older. He spent 6-7 months in yeshiva, and he worked day and night. The Gehoravet of Zich. So he came to his mashpia. He came to Shem Chaim. I said, Shem Chaim, I want to go to the Rebbe. So Shem Chaim said, yeah, you should go. In other words, he understood that it's not the minimum number of days he spent in yeshiva. He was not a boy, he was a man. And he was certainly very, very earnest. So he told him, you can't find some Rebbe. And he prepared him. Shem Chaim prepared him to go to the Rebbe by telling him different things that he has to understand, what it means to go to a Rebbe and the rest. Shem Chaim was in Lubavitch. So Shem Chaim heard from his mashpiyim, and he go over with his talmidim, how you meet a Rebbe, how you interact with a Rebbe, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that Shem Chaim told him was that the first words he hears from the Rebbe is Eirah Kol HaChaim Kulam. The first words out of the Rebbe's mouth are instruction for his whole life. And this is an old tradition by Chassidim, that the first words the Rebbe tells you, this is a Neshama Zach. In Hayom Yom, it's quiet now, in Hayom Yom it says that the Ersh Yechide is L'Visheirish HaNeshama. What that means, you took my hat also. The Ersh Yechide is L'Visheirish HaNeshama. No, it's okay. When someone goes into the Rebbe Yechidus, there's a lot of history and a lot of details. By the Alter Rebbe was one Seder, by the Middle Rebbe was a different Seder. But Chassidim knew that when you go into a Rebbe, the first instruction you get from the Rebbe is for your whole life. It's for your whole life. In other words, the first words out of the Rebbe to you are not a reflection of the situation and the circumstances and the technical inyonim that are transpiring. The first words the Rebbe tells you are your instructions for your whole life. And the Chassidim were very sensitive to that. And of course, the foundation of that is when you walk into the Rebbe doesn't just read your mind and your heart and your senses. He reads the Neshama. Pashat. The Rebbe reads the Neshama. And he reads the Neshama and he knows where this Neshama is coming from and where this Neshama is going to and how this Neshama has to go from point A to point B. And the Hira you get from the Rebbe initially is basically why you were born. And of course, the interesting thing about it is that the Rebbes don't make mistakes. Why don't they make mistakes? Because they're not guessing. That's why they don't make mistakes. They see clearly each neshama where it says in Hayom Yom, right? Also, the divas vesen, they know where the netzutzis are, and otherwise you have to hope that you're zeichet to find where your place is. When you go into the Rebbe gives you a hira. He tells you exactly what your purpose is. So this was how Chassidim were raised, and this is how Shem Chaim told Reuven Dunin. He said, "You want to see the Rebbe?" And the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth, he told him many different instructions, and these are one of the different instructions. One of the things that his mashpia told him. Kitzer, he comes to New York, and he saw the Rebbe, and the kesher, that the bond between him and the Rebbe was extraordinary. You could read the book, Hatraktaris Shel Rebbe. It's a good book about the Rebbe Dunin. It's a good sefer, and he as he put it, Bishvil Yehudi zeh kedai lachyot. For them, Yid is worth to live. For this Jew, it's worth to live. And he hung around 770. They gave him a dormitory room and all the Sachen. Anyway, a while after he arrived, he made an appointment to go to the Rebbe Yechidus. When he thought he was ready, anyway, he goes into the Rebbe. And I need to preface, they made a book of his life, a biography of his life. Before he died, in the Beis Mashiach magazine, there was a brief autobiography of his life that he wrote himself. He wrote it himself. And it's very personal, and he reveals that he was a Baal Tshuva. In other words, that he had once been frum, and then he went away, and then he came back. And he published, it's a few pages, his autobiography is not long, but he felt that the connection that the Rebbe had to him, the kindness that the Rebbe showed him, the love that the Rebbe showed him, was not personal. It was, in other words, it's for everybody. So he felt he had an obligation to share his experiences with the Rebbe, and he published it. It's very, very poignant. The book is a lot of details, but he himself wrote a few pages, an autobiography, but he wrote himself about his relationship with the Rebbe. So he tells the story. He walks into the Rebbe's room, and he gives the Rebbe a note. I'm sure you've heard how Yechidus by the Rebbe is described. Last time I was in Yechidus, I was 9, and I don't remember, so I can't tell you. But there's people older than I am. The Rebbe used to put on his glasses, and the way he would read Yetzetel was, the Rebbe would hold a piece of paper, and he used a pencil. So the Rebbe used to twirl it in such a way that he would see one line at a time. The Rebbe would hold the paper. He would read one line at a time. Every once in a while, the Rebbe would scribble something. The Rebbe used a pencil, not a pen. He would scribble something on the margin with a pencil. He would finish reading the Yetzetel, he'd put it down. He would take off his glasses, and then he would talk. This is interesting to me. When the Rebbe talked to people in Yechidus, it was very formal. It was like a siche. You're the only person in the room, but the Rebbe is talking to you like as if there's a whole olam. It was very formal. There was a certain distance. He didn't engage with you like a friend. I understand that different people had different experiences, but I've heard from many Bacharim, Chassidish Bacharim, the Rebbe would speak like mamash like a siche. Even if he gave a bracha, it was from a very, very formal place that the Rebbe would speak. Anyway, the Rebbe reads his zettel, and he puts down the paper, and he puts down his pencil, and he takes off his glasses, and the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth to him were, does he know how to drive a tractor? Heavy equipment, with more than this number of axles. Now you have to understand, this guy grew up in a frum home. He went away from Yiddishkeit, and he drove a tractor, and he drove a big dumpster, a big dump truck. To him, a tractor was a tzelem. It was the symbol of his rebellion. It was the symbol of his going away from his tradition. And now he rebelled against that. He came back to yeshiva. He grew a beard. He became a elachayid. He was a emes chassidish abacher. And he goes into the Rebbe, and the words of his mashpia are ringing in his head. At the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth are Hiral kol achayim kulam. What's the shalom aleichem? It was almost as if the Rebbe asked him if he had the tzelem. You know what? He was so. You know how to drive a tractor. The tractor was evil to him. The tractor was the source of his whole nefilah. And this is the halol. The first words out of the Rebbe's mouth. You know how to drive a tractor. He was so shocked. He was so not expecting it that he became hysterical. He pushed and fell apart. He started crying uncontrollably. So when he finished crying, and I think this part of the story is also unbelievable. It's unbelievable. He finished crying, and the Rebbe says to him in Yiddish, "Auf was bist du gekommen, Herz? Why did you come here?" Imagine you go into a room of a rabbi, and you cry out to kishkis, and when you finish crying, he says, "What do you want?" That's basically what happened. The Rebbe asked him, he gave the Rebbe a note. The Rebbe read it. The Rebbe took off his glasses and asked him if he knows how to drive a tractor, and what was the answer? He fell apart. So when he finishes crying, the Rebbe says to him, "Why'd you come here? What did you come here to?" Now, how sensitive is that? Ich mean, so he says he writes in his own autobiography, and it's in his book, that when the Rebbe asked him that question of what do you come ahead to, he decided to tell the Rebbe the whole emes. And standing in front of the Rebbe, he told the Rebbe everything. He didn't lie to he revealed to the Rebbe every inyan that he did that's not beseder. He told the Rebbe the whole truth, which is, try that by the oil. Try going to the oil and just telling the Rebbe the truth about, there's a Maisa, there's a tradition by Chassidim. I'll get back to my point in a minute. There's a tradition by Chassidim that the Rebbe go and you tell the emes. The Rebbe told the emes, the ganze emes. He tells stories on Lubavitch that a Bacha went into the Rebbe and he wrote on a zettel that he did in Aveda. The Rebbe Rashab read the zettel, and the Rebbe looks up at the Bacher and he says to the Bacher, "What did you do?" So the Bacher says to the Rebbe Rashab, "I wrote it on the paper." So the Rebbe Rashab says to the Bacher, "What did you do?" So the Bacher says to the Rebbe Rashab, "I wrote it on the paper." So the Rebbe Rashab says to the Bacher, "What did you do?" So the Bacher said to the Rebbe Rashab, "I wrote it on the paper." So the Rebbe Rashab said to the Bacher, "What's the thing you And they went back and forth a few times until the Bacher said what he did and he fainted on the spot, you understand? Yeah. So they tell us to the Fiedeke Rebbe, that's a shtekler. A guy went to Fiedeke Rebbe and you heard that you go into the Rebbe, you tell everything. So he wrote a zettel, and the Fiedeke Rebbe reads it. Kommt rein zu mir und sagt mir all seine Avedas und schämt sich gar nicht. He comes into me, everybody has no shame. There's a halacha, in Hilchos Yom Kippurim, that you're not allowed to be mizvad b'fnei kol adam. Vidui, confession, is only to God. You don't confess. It says in halacha, if you tell another person an aveda you did with another makom, it shows that you don't care. It doesn't bother you. Because if it bothers you, you couldn't share it with somebody else. Aveda is not like aveda. You're mechuyev to share. You have to ask mechila. Aveda is not makom, is between you and God. Anyway, he went into the Rebbe, this Reuven Dunin, and the Rebbe asked him, "What are you doing here?" He told the Rebbe his whole life, and then he finished up by saying to the Rebbe, "Ich bin kommen zum Rebbe, but the Rebbe soll mir geben mal ticken tshuva." I came to the Rebbe should teach me how to do tshuva. So the Rebbe said to him, "Frier wird man sich einordnen in Teiru Mitzvahs b'tzimcha v'tuv levav, und danach wird betrachten wegen tshuva," which means in English, first you'll acclimate yourself, you'll integrate yourself in learning Torah and doing mitzvahs with happiness, and then we'll talk about tshuva. This is the story. The end of the story is that 25 years later, in the early Mems, he was here for Tishrei, and the Rebbe made a Resiyim of Masechta Yuma, and the Rebbe spoke about tshuva. I think I remember it. You know what I think I remember it? I think I remember a guy getting off the bleachers in the middle of Farbrengen, walking down from the bleachers, walking all the way over to the Rebbe and saying L'chaim, and nobody stopped him. That was the Pele. Normally, if you wanted to get into the Rebbe, there'd be like 150 billion. The Reuven Dunin was standing on the bleachers. The Rebbe spoke a Sikha about tshuva. And he felt that this was the answer to a Yechidus from 25 years before. So when he asked the Rebbe for Tikkun Tshuva, he was a Bacharel, and now he was a Zayde. And the Rebbe answered, finished off that Yechidus. So when that Sikha was over, I think I remember him coming down from the bleachers, walking through that little path, walking over to the Rebbe and saying L'chaim. It was a hemshech to that Yechidus. Anyway, the point, the end of the story is this: Reuven Dunin spent his entire adult life driving a tractor. He was a construction worker. He drove a tractor. And in the first Rebbe magazine, for those who remember the 70s, there was a whole series of pictures of him with his hard hat and his overalls and his tractor. The Rebbe used to say to Reuven Dunin, "Vos mer Yidden von Zemer der Tractor." His job was to drive around Haifa with his tractors and overalls and his yellow hard hat. He had literally hundreds, maybe thousands of other children, because he broke the stereotype. He was a Chassidish Grace apart, and he was like them. He dug earth. He was close to. He was a laborer, and he broke the separation between those people and from a Yidden because he broke the stereotype. So as it turned out, as they say in the real world, the Rebbe didn't make a mistake. He didn't make a mistake. When the Rebbe asked him, "Do you know how to ride a tractor?" and he saw, the Mashpia says the first word out of the Rebbe's mouth, "Mamish, I'm destined to be driving a tractor. Kachava, yeah, but the tractor was a different tractor. It was a different tractor. Yeah. So this is the deal. The Nekudah is we're all connected to the Rebbe. There's different types of Chassidim, but there's different younger Chassidim and older Chassidim. We're all connected to the Rebbe. Those of us who are old enough to remember the Rebbe, we don't know what we saw. And those of us who are not old enough to remember the Rebbe have a real relationship with the Rebbe, because the whole business is a pneumistic thing, it's a Neshama thing, it's a pneumistic thing. What the Rebbe is way beyond us. But our relationship with the Rebbe is very, very important to us. It's very, very important to us. And it's very, very real. And Yada Inish Banafshe, everybody knows how personal really it is. I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll tell you one more thing after that, and then one more thing after that, and then one more thing after that, and eventually I'll let you sing a nigg. But I just want to say this to you, okay? I am not from the generation of Yechidus, really. My bar mitzvah, I didn't have a Yechidus. I was not Zeicher. My younger brother had a Yechidus. I didn't, because my mitzvah was Lamed Ches.
How did your brother have?
Because the Rebbe stopped Yechidus Mem Aleph. My brother was Tafshin Mem. My brother was Yechidus. The Rebbe stopped Yechidus Mem Aleph. Yechidus bar mitzvah. I did not have Yechidus. I don't know why. I really don't understand why. But okay.
You said you were not.
Yeah, but bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah Yechidus I did not have. My younger brother did. So my relationship with the Rebbe, my personal relationship with the Rebbe, and my whole generation, is the eyes. The Rebbe would sit at the Farbrengen, and there's thousands of people in the room, and b'derech hateva the Rebbe was half blind. That's the truth of the matter. And the Rebbe would speak. When the Rebbe spoke, he didn't look at anybody. He looked at the pole, because if he looked in anybody's direction, they would absolutely make a hole through them. Yeah. And then we would sing a niggun, and the Rebbe would look around, and you look at the videos. It looks like the Rebbe saying hello. How are you? Thank you for the check. It's nice to see you. It all looks very, very ordinary. Here's what you don't understand, and the only way to understand this is to have experienced it. Every person whose eyes were touched by the Rebbe's eyes, it's less than a second. Whenever you interacted with the Rebbe, you looked into your eyes. You look at Keshel Bracha. Yeah, you got wine from the Rebbe after Yom Tov. So there's a line of people, and the Rebbe's, Rabbi Mentlich is filling the Rebbe's cup, and he pours into your cup wine. And as he pours cup into your wine, he looks at the cup. And he says, L'chaim v'levracha. In the olden days, there was a different seder, but in my generation, as he poured the wine into L'chaim v'levracha, before he put wine into your cup, he looked into your eyes. Now you woke up there, you're holding your cup, and you got two goals in mind. A, that the Rebbe shouldn't miss your cup. In other words, when the Rebbe pours, the cup should be. B, that when the Rebbe looks at you, you should look back. So many, many times you made the mistake of looking at the cup, expecting the Rebbe to pour the wine into your cup, but while you're looking at your cup, the Rebbe's looking at you. And then when you raise, you have to look at the Rebbe, he's looking into your cup. So you had to hold cup. You had to hold cup when you're holding your cup. That first the Rebbe would look at you. And then when the Rebbe looked at you, it was very quick. Zip. When the Rebbe looked at you, it was fire. The Rebbe's eyes were fire. He looked straight through you. And he would look at you for a very short second, and then pour the wine into your cup. So any interaction with the Rebbe, my dollars was the same thing. When the Rebbe gave you a dollar, there was a split second before he handed you the dollar that he looked at you. And you wanted to look into the Rebbe's eyes as the Rebbe looked at your eyes. This was always the idea. If you want to have a good picture of the Rebbe, is not a picture of the Rebbe where the Rebbe is looking at you. A good picture of the Rebbe where the Rebbe is looking at you, you're looking at the Rebbe. Because every time your eyes and the Rebbe's eyes touched for a very short moment, it was a conversation. It was a whole meeting. And then as the Farbrengens, you're far away. You're 20 feet from the Rebbe, 30 feet from the Rebbe, 40 feet from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe looks around the room. One thing I can guarantee, anybody who was around the Rebbe knows this rule. If you were not sure whether the Rebbe said L'chaim to you, you were sure that he didn't say L'chaim to you. Because if the Rebbe said L'chaim to you, there was no suffix. because he would look at you. It didn't matter how far away you were, and you felt the fit, and he would look through you, and it was a whole conversation. It was a whole conversation. Our generation, how we were raised. The Rebbe called him dying. And trust me, there was a lot of conversations. Sometimes the conversations were good, some of the conversations were, and sometimes they were disappointed. And the only person who knew was you and him. That was the whole beauty. Thousands of people in the room, only you and he knew the Wasser dort getroffen. You understand? That's how this was. So anyway, so the Rebbe has a kasha with each one. The Rebbe has a kasha with each person. I just want to say, Zilberstrom, the old man Zilberstrom, had the geheißen Mordechai, wie entsteht seine? The father of the Zilberstroms. Anybody know his name? Rabbi Aaron Mordechai Zilberstrom. He met the Rebbe in 1947, Tafshin Zayin. He gave his whole life away to the Rebbe. The Mesiras Nefesh of this Yid is Ein L'Shayin. Lubavitch just take everybody and everything for granted. Rabbi Aaron Mordechai Zilberstrom was a Godel B'Yisrael by the Litvische, by the Chassidische. He built a yeshiva in Yerushalayim that all the Gedolim sent their kids to. The Gerrer Rebbe and his kids. He closed that in Yerushalayim. He closed that yeshiva to start the Reshet Sol Yeit Vitzak Lubavitch, and he worked like a dog, mamish like a dog, for the Rebbe his whole life. The Mesiras Nefesh is unbelievable. The end of the story was he always wanted to come to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe never let him go because he was working. He didn't show up to the Rebbe till Lamed Beis. That means he saw the Rebbe in 1947. The next time he saw the Rebbe was 25 years later, and he wrote a Yuman. His Mishpacha printed a biography of his. It's a very good read. It's kedai to read. There are a lot of beautiful things to read in that book by different people. But he came in Tafshin Lamed Beis. He wrote a Yuman of the Tishrei, and he describes the Farbrengen. He's sitting at the Farbrengen, and he's watching the Rebbe. He was a big pikech. He was a deep man, and he writes in his journal, "Yesh b'y cheshbon kol echad." There's hundreds of people in the room, and the Rebbe's got each person, and the Rebbe got business. Yesh b'y cheshbon kol echad. Every single person here has a personal business with the Rebbe. And as the Rebbe looks around the room and he nods and he nods and he nods and he ignores you and he ignores you and he nods and he doesn't nod, he watched. He says, you could see that this is big business. It looks like a very natural event, but the Rebbe was reaching out in his way as he understood to each one as each one needs to be. And this is not any, there was basically Hamilton, you can't verstehen. Every boy in this room has a cheshbon. The Rebbe has a cheshbon in kol echad. V'yazei the cheshbon stimmt. In other words, what's the mathematics of the cheshbon? The Rebbe has a cheshbon with each one of us, and we have a cheshbon. Each one of us have a cheshbon with the Rebbe. So the cheshbon soll stimmen. The cheshbon will the brocha.